So it's a pleasure to introduce our next speaker. So now we have the sponsored talks. The first talk is from DeepMind, and the speaker is Federico Carnevale. And Federico is Argentinian, and he's put in a lot of effort this week running the tutorials, and he's been at all the tutorials during Khipu this week. So I'm sure you're familiar with his face. So Fede is a research science in the neuroscience team at DeepMind in the UK. He did his PhD in computational neuroscience and then spent some time doing experiments combining behavior and neurophysiology in rodents. Currently, his research focuses on studying tasks that are easy for animals but hard for state-of-the-art systems. And as I mentioned, he taught all the practicals. So let's welcome Fede.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi everyone. So I'm going to talk about a recent research project that my amazing collaborators and me have been working on recently. And it's about probing predictive agents with question answering. Let's see if this works. Yeah, so in this work, we were interested in the relationship between representation learning, prediction, and evaluation. And representation is sort of arguably the key to most successes in AI. And if we want agents that are behaving intelligently in complex, open-ended environments, then these agents should be able to learn representations that are task agnostic and general without a lot of exhaustively labeled data or carefully designed rewards. And prediction has sort of arisen as a powerful method to learn general representations. But one of the challenges is how do we evaluate these methods? So here we propose using question answering as a tool, as an investigative tool to probe these agents, agents that have learned representations via prediction, and try to understand what information about the external world have they learned through egocentric prediction of sensory data. And the reason why we think question answering is interesting is sort of twofold. One, sort of ideally, we would like to be able to interact with agents in natural language because that's intuitive for humans. But also, more pragmatically, the questions that we can pose to an agent are sort of fairly open-ended. We can come up with questions as complicated as we want. So this is sort of like the motivation for which we use question answering as a probing tool. So what is cool about prediction is that it's a very old idea that we can trace back at least until the work of Helmholtz, where he sort of proposed prediction, proposed perception to be this interaction between sensory signals, like feed-forward processing of sensory signals, combined with top-down predictions via knowledge or priors about the world. And this idea continued to be important throughout history and across many disciplines like computer science and psychology and neuroscience. So for example, in the 80s, McLennan and Ramelhart were studying how the perception of letters is dependent on the context of the world in which these letters are in. Jeff Ellman was studying the emergence of semantics in just by predicting the next token in language models. I think it's probably one of the first ones to use recurrent neural networks for language modeling and showing how semantics emerges from this prediction task. In the 90s, Diane and Hinton proposed the Helmholtz machine, sort of the precursor of the VAE that we know today. And meanwhile, in parallel, Rao and Ballard were working on explaining previously unexplained properties of receptive fields in the visual system by computational models that apply this idea of prediction. So it's a very old idea. More recently, it has continued to be used across many modalities, like, for example, Elmo and BERT in language, or ideas like in-painting, or using the prediction of optical flow in vision, These are all just some examples of how sort of self-supervised learning helps helps building good representations for other downstream tasks. In RL, which is probably more related to what I'm going to talk about, self-supervision has been used for learning good representations, specifically in environments that are partially observable. You don't see the entire MDP, so you need to somehow build some representation of the state. So essentially, we are interested in the relationship between these three spaces that were. This is a very nice picture from this paper that I recommend. So essentially, we're interested in the relationship between the observation space. So this is the space where sensory signals live. So if we care about vision, this is the space of images. The latent space, which is something that we don't observe, but that we think sort of is the thing that controls how the sensory observations are produced. And the neural representation space, that is the space of activations or firing of neurons in a brain or activations in a neural network. So the diagram that we have in mind is there is some underlying generative process by which the images are created according to a configuration of some lower dimensional set of latent variables. That's how the observations are created, and that's the only thing that the agent or the animal observes. And we're interested in the agent that is trying to predict the observation in the future, and by that task, learning some structure about the latent space. So that's the whole idea. So in this context, the specific question that we want to ask is how much and what kind of knowledge about the external world, the objective knowledge about the state of the world, can be learned through egocentric prediction of your sensory channel. That is the motivation. And to address this question, we developed this environment that is a Unity-based, visually rich, like 3D environment that resembles a room. And that room can be populated with a number of objects. There are 50 types of different objects or shapes, and they come in different colors, and we can put them in different random places in each episode. The agent just gets a first-person view of this environment. I'm showing here sort of the top-down view. This is the agent in two different positions and a trajectory, and these are the objects. So like in this, when the agent is here, this is its observation, and this is observation when it's down here. And the agent has a 9-dimensional action space, it can move, rotate, and that sort of thing. So this is the general setup. What we do is we sort of skip the exploration process problem by training the agent to explore the room, giving a reward for visiting every object in the room. So what we want is to guarantee that the agent has observed the entire room. So this is a video of the agent that was trained via RL to solve this task of visiting the objects. You can see the agent view here. It's looking at and this is the top-down view just for illustration purposes. This is the only thing that the agent is looking at. So now we have these episodes of agents exploring rooms that are different in every episode. And so once we have that, we can ask questions. We start asking questions to the agent, like, for example, what is the color of the bed, if there is a bed in the room? Or how many wardrobes are there? What is the object near the bed? Is there a basketball in the room? So there's all these questions we can ask the agent. And importantly, the agent doesn't have a general view of the state of the room. So it has to sort of integrate observations through time, like sort of requires a memory component. And many times the answer to a question is not in one single frame. So for example, if you ask how many wardrobes are there are actually 3 wardrobes, but it's looking at 2 of them. So we developed, like inspired by previous work on question answering, we developed this set of questions sort of different type. So for example, we have questions that ask about attributes. So for example, what is the color of this particular shape? or what is the shape of this particularly colored object, or counting how many of these things are in the room, or how many of these things of this color, like different shapes but the same color, or presence or absence of things, like is there a basketball in the room, or more complicated things, like are there the same number of something versus some other thing. And so we developed all these question types, and sort of these are procedurally created in each episode. And we use these questions to probe the agent to know whether it knows these things or not. And this is the most important thing. We're not training the agents to actually answer the question. What we want is a probing tool. So we train an external network to ask the questions from the internal state of the agent, but we don't flow gradients. We don't let the gradients flow into the agent. This is like key to understand the sort of the motivation of our work. We are using question answering as an external tool to understand what are the representation of agents, but we don't train the agents to answer the question. Actually, the agent doesn't have a language channel. It doesn't ever see the question. It's going to maybe be more clear when I draw the entire diagram. But sort of this stop gradient here means that the learning is happening. The learning for answering the questions is happening only in the decoder. Okay. Feel free to stop me at any time and ask questions if you want. All right. So we are going to compare three agents, sort of like a baseline and two predictive agents. They're all sort of share the same structure, which is there is an observation, which is an image at each time step. This is processed with some convolutional neural network to form an embedding, and these embeddings are consumed. This is not working anymore. These embeddings are consumed by a recurrent neural network that has some internal state H, and from that we produce actions or logics of actions, and then sample actions, and we train this via RL, as we learned from Nando yesterday. So this is the sort of the base agent. And then predictive agents are just agents that have sort of like what people call auxiliary tasks or auxiliary losses. And these are sort of additional to the loss from reinforcement learning. And we compared two that have been previously published. So one is called the action conditional CPC, or contrastive predictive coding, and the other one is called the SimCore. That's how I'm going to refer to them. And I'm not going to go into much detail about them because you can go and read papers, but just sort of mention the key ideas. Common to both methods, what they do is they have an external simulation network that consumes actions in the future, and it's trying to predict condition to those action sequences. It's trying to sort of predict the future observation. That's common to both. That is sort of the red recurrent neural network consuming actions. They all start from the current, from the state of the agent at time t. And then the difference is action conditional CPC, what it's doing is in any time in the future, you give a real future and a fake future, and you ask a network to discriminate. Is this a real future, or is this the other one? So it's sort of based on this idea of noise contrastive estimation. Whereas the SimCore is using these unrolled futures to train a conditional generative model to produce the pixels. So it's predicting at pixels. It's not discriminating. It's actually generating the future image. So essentially, it's based on a conditional version of the ComDraw, if that makes any, if you're familiar with this type of ComDraw, a convolutional draw. Have you? Yeah. So it's predicting the distribution over pixels. And the conditioning variable is this unroll state. Okay? So this is sort of what is trying to be shown here. You unroll and then use this vector as a conditional. You can think of it like this thing conditions a VAE. So there is a little, this is not working anymore. And there's a little VAE that is predicting pixels. So these are the two things that, sort of the three things that we're going to compare. And then the question answering part is sort of we take the same internal state, stop the gradient, so we don't train the agent to this other auxiliary task. we have a different network here, which is another RNN that receives this state and the question and produces an answer. So this is a supervised. So here you have like RL for training the agent, sort of self-supervised or unsupervised learning for the prediction thing, and supervised learning for answering the questions. Yeah. So this is sort of one example of the type of result that we have. So the agent is in this room. The question is, what shape is the green object? It's a bed. That's the ground truth answer. The agent will like walk around. That's the RL part is making the agent go around. And then, so these are 4 time steps within one episode. So, and these are the probability of answering each of these 5 words. So at the beginning, the agent hasn't seen the bed, so it says everything more or less with the same probability. At some point, it gets like a little thing of like green thing here, but it's not sure. It's maybe a bed, but it could also be a hair dryer. And then at some point, it looks at the bed more, the bed is bigger in the, or it's more clearly in the frame, and then the probability of saying bed increases. So this is sort of what happens. I think I have a video, or see if I can. I think this is more clear if it's played slowly. Yeah, so the question is, what is the color of the pencil? Hasn't seen the pencil yet. At some point, it looks at the pencil, and now it's like, it's very sure that it's a pencil. And even when it's not looking at the pencil, I'm still asking, like, what is the color of the pencil, and still saying red. You can see all sort of dynamics of, like, forgetting. Sometimes it forgets that the color, it forgets that there is something in the room, and you can study all of these, memory-related things. Yeah, this is just another example where the question is about shapes. So what is the aquamarine object? And the answer is a grinder, and yeah, sort of like similar dynamics. Yeah. All right. Let
Hello?
me see.
So my question is about how states are represented. Is it only operating off of pixels? Because otherwise, how does it? It seems like there's extra information about what objects are in the frame.
So the question answering module receives the internal state of the whatever recurrent neural network you have, and the question. So this is sort of our like very limited language processing thing, and it produces an answer which is only categorical. So there are these are one-word answers, and produces like logic for each possible answer. So it's essentially like a classification problem for the language.
Is it doing this purely off of raw pixels? There's no extra
No.
information?
It's purely of the internal state of the LSTM, for example. It's not seeing pixels, right?
Okay.
So yeah, the diagram is here. Like this is the RNN. These are the images. The RNN is consuming processed embeddings that come from the images, and the question is answered from like the internal state of the.
So the XTs here are raw pixels.
All of these are raw pixels. These are frames at each time step.
Okay, so no extra information is injected.
Sorry?
No extra information is injected into
No
the
extra information.
Okay, cool.
It's just the internal state of the RNN and the question.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah. So actually, no. Let's take this.
Can you go back to the previous slide?
Yeah.
So my question is, have you tried or are interested or going to try having a sequence-to-sequence model, so instead of getting a one-word answer to get a description?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is a very simplified language interface, but yeah, it would be awesome to have something that is more nuanced and can, yeah, exactly, yes, definitely, and future work.
Okay.
Yes.
T+1 and T+2 are just consecutive frames?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so videos. Yeah, so these are results on the task of what shape is the color object. What I'm showing here is 5 traces. So the first trace is sort of like an upper bound, which is if we remove the stop gradient from this scheme and we actually train the agent to answer the questions, we can show that it's answering the questions, learning to answer the questions is not difficult. You can answer the questions with almost like perfectly. This is not the problem. The problem is the agent is just predicting the next observation or like some observations in the future. What kind of objective knowledge can you learn from that, from predicting subjective experience? So it's not that the questions are difficult to answer. What we are evaluating is sort of this unsupervised version of learning a state representation, sort of. And then this is the SimCore agent that that can, answer the questions with some higher, with some like lower accuracy, but much higher than the baseline. So sort of the baselines and the other predictive agent. So CPC. The action conditional CPC, we weren't able to produce any like good accuracy in any of or like most of the tasks. It was not different from the LSTM, the like bare LSTM agent. And the other thing that we have here is the question-only baseline, which is something people do in question answering, which is if you don't see any image, and I just give you the question and you have to answer. This sort of measures what is the bias in the question answering setup. Like what is if there is one answer that is more likely always. This is sort of what a blind agent would do. And then so as you make the questions more and more complicated, like spatial relationships or like counting, the accuracy decreases quite strongly. But overall, the SimCore was much better than the other agents at providing representations that can be decoded in answers. And finally, we wanted to know whether these representations lead to sort of compositionally generalization. So the thing we did is you can think of each question as a combination of two things, like the thing you are asking, the reference that you are asking for, and the answer. So for example, for a task which is what is the color of this particular shape? Each question would be like, what is the color of the ball? And the answer is blue. So you can to make a train test split, you can split this into 4 quadrants, train on 3 of them, but test on these held out questions. So these are questions that you've never used during training, but the agent has answered things, has seen questions referring to that thing with other answers, and has answered these things in other questions, sort of. So this is a training set, this is a test set, and this is the ability of the. So to be clear, what we are testing is the generalization of the decoder, but the decoder is receiving the representations from the agent. So it's what we're actually getting is sort of how much this representation lead to compositional generalization. So this is the training thing that I showed before, and this is the test. So this is on questions that have never been seen during training. So just to conclude and emphasize some things, we developed this question answering setup to probe the quality or the kind of knowledge that internal representations have when they are in a partially observable environment and they're predicting egocentric, sort of grounded observations. How much objective knowledge about the external environment can we decode? Predictive agents were much better than non-predictive agents, but not all predictive agents were equally good. So it turns out that the particular loss that you use is important. And then the generalization capabilities suggest that there is some sort of compositionality that you can do from these representations. That's not a given. And then lastly, it's important to note that decoding tools are correlational experiments. So a more powerful way that we're thinking of is, what if you do an intervention? What if you sort of inception, like you put something in the agent and see if that behavior changes. That would be more like what in neuroscience people do with optogenetics, like perturbing the system and see that the behavior changes some way. That would be more powerful. But this is only like a correlational study, sort of. And just to finalize, just emphasize the power of situated agents equipped with powerful predictive losses in learning about the state. This is important for many things, RL in partially observable environments, for example. And then also I think the power of evaluating agents using natural linguistic interactions. This is sort of like a very little step, but I think it's a powerful line of research. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Fede, for that amazing talk. We have time for one quick question as other people ask questions during the talk. Any questions?
So I have one question. I think this is fantastic work, like really, really cool. The only thing is that this looks very complicated. Is it going to be open source? Because I'm sure that even though I know this method, like the background very well, it will take me probably 6 months to implement.
Yeah, so we implemented this on the MLab as well. So it's exactly the same, just the MLab environment, which is publicly available. And the only thing is we haven't yet published the question dataset, but yeah, it's definitely in our plans to open source this.
And Merlin and all of these things, or like the CPC and the draw parts and
that
stuff.
is more to the authors of those papers, which is not me. That I don't know.
Okay, let's thank Fede once again and keep you around.